Morning everybody, I'm Andre de Ruyter from Nampak, and today I'm going to be talking about the cost of complexity in manufacturing, some of the headwinds that manufacturing in South Africa is facing, and ways in which we can mitigate and overcome that by being smarter about how we run our internal processes, by simplifying our product portfolios, and by focusing on the basics of business in order to improve sustainable profitability. Manufacturing in South Africa is in a tough spot at this point in time. What I want to share with you today are some ideas that we have at Nampak as to how we think we can simplify and standardize and in the process save. The contribution that manufacturing makes to GDP is quite low from where it was in the 1980s. It used to be at 24% and it's now come down to under 13% already, which is, given South Africa's stage of development, and this is a very interesting McKinsey graph that points to percentage of manufacturing as a percentage of GDP, and then GDP per capita. So according to this graph, this is where South Africa is sitting today. And this is where South Africa was in 1990. So we've seen, without significant growth in our GDP per capita, we have seen a significant drop in the status of manufacturing as a contributor to GDP. And this is a cause for concern, because if you look at countries with which we compete, all of the emerging markets, that we should be sitting at about 28 to 30% of contribution to GDP as a manufacturing sector. So there's a big opportunity for us, but there are also reasons why things are where they are. There are imports from China in particular. Labor costs are high, energy costs are high. We have bad infrastructure, we have policy and regulatory uncertainty. This is a controversial graph, but what I try to illustrate is not the data per se, but the trend, which I think is the more important issue to take note of. And that is that if you rebase labor productivity, which is this black line, and you compare it to real wages, and you go back to the 1970s, you can see that real wages have, since the 1980s, increased tremendously. And that coincided with the growth and the birth of the labor union movement in South Africa. However, if you look at labor productivity, that has seen a precipitous decline. So as wages have increased in real terms, productivity has declined. Let's just park that thought and consider what manufacturing as an enterprise has to do with this issue. And what does a lack of investment in advancing technology have to do with this picture? Moving on to a very familiar picture for all of us, and a very depressing picture, Eskom. Eskom is getting very expensive. If you compare us with the rest of the world in terms of what we pay for electricity, and this is in 2015, so these are recent numbers, that is where South Africa lies. Think back to the McKinsey graph that I showed you at the beginning and the position that Germany occupied. Look at what Germany pays for electricity. And yet, up until very recently, Germany was the biggest exporter of manufactured goods in the world. My thesis is that for many years, business in South Africa has externalized internal inefficiencies through relying on cheap labor and cheap energy. And today, neither labor nor energy is cheap. Now, here's one thing where I think everybody in South Africa needs to stand up and take accountability. We have been investing in skills in the wrong part of the economy. We need to, as a country, restore the dignity and the appeal to young people of the blue-collar worker. But if you look at this is a precipitous decline. And the SETAs, more than half of which are in administration at any given point in time, they have not been successful. But then also industry have said, okay, government, you are imposing a skills levy on us. So as a consequence, we are no longer going to invest in training. And guess what? It's caught up with us in a massive way. As we have shed our share of manufacturing contribution to GDP, we have shed jobs at an enormous rate. If we were, as a country, to have manufacturing at the appropriate level of contribution to GDP and appropriate for our level of development, think of the jobs that we could be creating in this sector. Just simply extrapolating, close on 1 million jobs. And these are high quality jobs. But what that requires of us is that as a country, we first of all need to be competitive internationally. So what we need to do is we need to identify, first of all, what are our competitive advantages, what are our comparative advantages. And in order to do that, I think leadership is required, leadership from both government as well as from business. But there's an opportunity here for us to build these value chains. And I have to say that the Industrial Development Corporation, under the leadership of Jeffrey Kwena, is doing a lot of work on this. And they're really looking for opportunities to build these value chains. I think government's done a fair amount, not enough, but a fair amount. So we've had the Industrial Policy Action Plan, that's IPAP 1 and 2. We've had incentives under Section 12I of the Income Tax Act, MSEP, which is the Manufacturing Competitive Enhancement Program, Competition Commission investigations. Labor inflexibility is a major challenge for us, and I think again here there's scope for labor and business to get together to address not only the challenges but the opportunity. Collective bargaining is something that really operates against bigger businesses. We really have issues in admitting key skills into the country. And I think we need to recognize as a country we require certain specialized skills, and we need to encourage people to come to our country instead of showing them the door. And then I think we need to address some infrastructural issues. If you look at the rate of gross capital formation as a percentage of GDP, and you compare China with South Africa, China is the blue line on top, and we are investing like a fully developed economy. We're not investing like a growing, developing country. The other key thing as a manufacturing sector is that we cannot rely on economic growth to bail us out. In a growing economy, as the saying goes, a rising tide lifts all boats, everybody looks good. So here's the good news part of the presentation. How do we respond? And I've got a theory that we are still struggling to overcome the consequences of the pre-94 economic policy. Because remember, pre-94 there was a policy of autarky. And autarky is all about being self-sufficient, to replace all imports, to manufacture everything yourself. But the consequence of that is that today we have manufacturing capacity in South Africa that is not competitive on a global scale. We make things in South Africa that we should be importing from China. And some of those businesses have gone out of business, and that explains the precipitous decline in contribution of manufacturing to the economy. What I've identified is that there are huge opportunities within businesses in South Africa to do things better, to come to grips with complexity, to simplify, to standardize. There's this triangle on the board that creates the vicious spiral of increasing complexity, which leads to inefficiency, which leads to more waste. So, for example, if you have inbound complexity, if your raw materials are unduly complicated, you have too many suppliers, you have too many different grades and specifications of raw materials that you bring into your facility, If you have too many transport service providers, you have a requirement for more debtors clocks because you have more bills to pay. You have increased inventory because you now have to keep inventory on hand and there's a minimum delivery size. You have time and effort to manage this warehouse. So manufacturing complexity leads to manufacturing waste, and this is where we have made products that are incredibly innovative, that have won prizes for innovation, but they haven't been profitable. So the new mantra is innovate for profitability. Reducing the complexity of your product portfolio is an enormous lever to improve profitability because of the fact that frequent changeovers between different SKUs requires greater skill. It puts a lot of pressure on poor production planning, and you have to have advanced planning software that uses linear programming. You've got to use the tools available to manage this complexity. If you don't, you will be inefficient. That's the only thing you can say. So this is you can see it's a censored chart. This is actual work that was done in one of our divisions. So one of the questions that I asked my team when I got to Nampak is, do we make money on every can that leaves the factory? And the answer, of course we do. Of course we do. Okay. The next question was, so show me. And that was a bit more difficult. The answer wasn't that readily forthcoming. So the team went away and they came back with a quite surprising conclusion. And the conclusion was that we were, and this is a log scale of the number of units, and this is the operating margin ex factory gate. So in other words, without head office and other overhead cost allocation. So it's amazing how quickly you can restore yourself to profitability if you just stop doing loss-making stuff. You talk to all of the management consultants, and they will tell you that in every business that hasn't done this exercise in the past 5 years, there will be loss-making SKUs in the portfolio. You need to understand cost allocation in a very fundamental way. You need to understand cost management in a very fundamental way. So what has Nampak been doing? First of all, we have been investing to compete. In our diff food business, we are still sitting with bits of kit that is more than 40 years old. Now, you are 5, 6 generations of technology behind where you should be. So we are going to replace around about 200 production lines, and we are going to end up with 100. We will make fewer SKUs, but many more products, and we will make substantially more money as a result of this investment program. And then our BevCan business has been investing heavily in converting tin plate beverage lines into aluminium, an average saving in energy per can of 17%. We are rationalizing both our customers and our SKUs. Fact is, some customers are too expensive to serve. So you have to bump up the price to a level that reflects the cost of service. And if they then still are not prepared, then they're welcome to go to the competition. So we will be reducing our active customer accounts by about 180, and we will reduce our SKUs by 1,227. So the efficiencies that we can gain by stopping the manufacture of unprofitable SKUs is huge. So to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, yes, it's tough out there, manufacturing. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, we have been blaming the external environment. We have been blaming the unions, the government, Eskom, the Chinese, but I think we haven't held the mirror up to ourselves with a view to understanding what the opportunity is that lies within our own factory gates. And that's what I find quite exciting. I find it very stimulating, and it's something that we are doing at the moment in Nampak in order to become substantially more competitive as a manufacturing organization. So thank you very much.